Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Lorene HD for a new video, and today, what a treat, we have a special guest. Some of you might already know him. His name is Courtney Brame and he is the founder and host of the suicide prevention podcast Something Positive for Positive People. And actually our chat was so long that I've ended up chopping it in 3 parts, so he's going to be our special guest for this video as well as the upcoming 2 next videos. And they're each gonna be between 15 and 20 minutes, which is a bit longer than my typical videos, but they're actually worth every minute of it. And for this first one, I really wanted to hear from Courtney's perspective. What is a man's perspective, especially a Black man's perspective, on being diagnosed with an incurable STI? And I wanted to hear a little bit the process that he went through, and I also asked him about what his expectations were before disclosing and opening up about his genital herpes diagnosis, and if those expectations ended up matching the reality of what happened or not. So without further ado, I hope you're gonna enjoy this chat as much as we did. Please let us know in the comments below what your experience of disclosing, opening up about your diagnosis has been with, friends or family, relatives, whoever you opened up with, if you have opened up with anyone yet. And let us know how you've processed your diagnosis as well, whether it's genital herpes or like another incurable STI. And you can find Courtney's information in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to stay up to date with my latest content. That's it. Enjoy.
First off, I want to thank you for having me here. Much appreciated. And I've seen your work since I started my own podcast, when I was looking for different resources that were out there and available. Yours was one of the first that I came across. It was actually your interview with Devin. So shout out to Devin.
One thing that I'm really curious to hear about is, how does it affect, how does a diagnosis affect a man? How does a man feel about their manhood after a diagnosis?
As far as the male perspective goes, I would say my personal experience was more of a logical one than anything. It was, okay, I know that I have an incurable STI now. I know that there are outbreaks that occur, and that's the worst part of it physically, right? So figuring out how to manage that was my top priority. It was, okay, how do you manage living with herpes? How do you minimize outbreaks? How do you minimize the risks of transmitting it onto a sexual partner? These were the things that I felt most compelled to figure out right away. The statistics, they're all there, but to me, cutting through the BS about it, there's no way to really know. There's no way to just completely eliminate the risk of exposure. So it was important for me to first accept that. And in talking to other men, that's sort of been their experience. It's just been, how do I deal with this more than anything else? In cases, there can be a denial stage after a diagnosis. And when I've spoken to men about it specifically, it's been more of a, it is what it is kind of approach. Not to say that men just don't feel it. I think that it just kind of, the emotional piece gets put away. And even on my podcast, I have so few males who've been on and talked about their experience with herpes, not because they're not comfortable with talking about their experience with herpes, but because of the challenging emotions that come up with it as well. Some of the men who've been on there have done a tremendous amount of work on themselves to be able to open up and be so vulnerable, because it's not necessarily the herpes that gets people, or men specifically, it's the emotions around it. And the way that we really deal with emotions kind of dictates how we deal with how we interpret stigma, for instance, because the physical stuff, once we've learned that, okay, the outbreaks are manageable, for the most part preventable, depending on your lifestyle and what your triggers are. Once we get past that, we can deal with the emotional stuff, if it's in us to deal with the emotional stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in my experience, just talking to male friends of mine, there's this kind of recurrent pattern where they feel that somehow they're immune to it, like it's not gonna get them. As if, when they contracted it, it felt like a surprise for them, not necessarily because they didn't know that they were engaging sexually with someone who had it, more so because they somehow felt that, because of their lifestyle and because of they were never getting sick anyways, like they wouldn't have flu very often, and all of that led them to believe that they were part of a pool that somehow was going to dodge the virus. And then when they contracted it, because obviously they're human and their body works like any other human's body, there was some anger. There was a lot of anger that they felt, which was not necessarily easy to process, because there was some anger towards themselves, there was some anger towards the partner, anger, just like probably general anger. Um, and even to come to that point of understanding that they were feeling anger was already a lot of work emotionally. Can you relate to that at all, or did your journey take a complete different path?
Initially, it was more maybe embarrassment or sadness. When I was diagnosed, my first thought was, oh my God, who else did I give this to? And if I gave this to someone, what are they going through? Right. So after contacting my most recent partners and finding out that they didn't have it, I think that the feeling was relief more than anything. Like I was relieved to know, okay, whew, I didn't hurt anyone else, like through giving them an STI, right? Um, After that feeling, having no one to blame or point the finger at, it was just me. So how, am I going to be angry at myself for this happening? Looking at it from my perspective, I don't think there was anything that I could have done differently except for have the conversation. And even if I had the conversation, it would have been possible that someone just wouldn't have known that they had herpes. Or it could have been me that had herpes for years up until the point of my actual outbreak and diagnosis. So none of that information really seemed important at the time. Looking back on it, like what could I have done differently? Because it's like, all right, we're here now. How are we going to move forward? Um, I think anger started to hit when it came to the disclosure process, because it's like it's not fair for me to have to talk about this or bring this up now, or um, for me to not be as sexually liberated or free as I once was, or how I interpreted it at the time, how I once was. I'll say that working through this has definitely made me much more sexually liberated, just given all of the other pieces that had to be examined and put into place. So when we talk about like emotions, for instance, like realizing that there is some anger, or realizing that there's some resentment, or realizing that there's an emotion toward myself, maybe even self anger for putting myself in this situation, being able to logically sort through that and say, okay, here are the facts about herpes, here are the facts about how I could have gotten it, and here are the facts about how we're able to move forward. All of these things, being able to sit with them, examine them, sort through them, and identify with one narrative rather than all of these different narratives that we can subscribe to in line with the stigma. I think that that really helps in processing uh, all of the emotions that can come with it.
I wanted to ask you about when you started something positive for positive people. And I can imagine that you, like, it came from your guts. You did it because you had just a hunger for to have those conversations first and foremost, for yourself, but also to let people hear all those perspectives that are so taboo and are so even censored from, whether it's media or social media or whatnot. Did you have any expectation of how your diagnosis. I'm not even talking about the work that you're doing necessarily as a first step, like how your diagnosis was going to come across, especially as a Black man. And asking this from the Black men perspective because Black men can be portrayed as over sexualized, like hyper sexualized. And I think there's like a lot of prejudice that you guys are facing in a lot of areas, but also in sexuality. And did you have any expectations? And if so, how did they match the reality or not?
As a Black man, first off, uh, Black bodies in general just tend to be overly sexualized, right? And so coming out now as, being this big Black dude, mildly attractive to some extent, for people to see now that I have an STD, and for me to be putting that out there, there's sort of this subconscious shit, like the expectation of me being able to deliver the dick, right, is now gone. Like, I can't do that anymore because who's going to want to have sex with someone who has herpes on their genitals now, right? So that was something that I struggled with for about that long. And then it went away because after opening up about it, there was such love that I was met with. And then dating wasn't an issue anymore because now I had the confidence to have the conversation. And it wasn't a conversation of, hey, I have herpes, here's some information about it. Now it was more of like, hey, I do this thing where I try and help people who have herpes, and here's how it affected me. I have it. This is what it's like. This is how I manage it. Here's how I deal with it. So the disclosure process definitely changed for me after having put this, after having opened up and put my face out there. And then I really thought that I wouldn't get any sort of feedback from Black people, from Black men, Black women, um, which still is kind of, it's weird, right? There's also added layers of shame and stigma there. When I initially heard from Black men, we'll start there. So with Black men, more times than I can count, I've been contacted about just like, hey, how do you do this? How do you disclose? Like, what do you do about outbreaks? How am I going to live with myself? And there's this short exchange of information back and forth. And then I don't hear from them anymore. Like, one guy, he's a model, not famous, but he's a model, had a lot of Instagram followers, found my account, was like, yo, can you talk? We had a phone conversation. We talked for about an hour plus. And after that, I just hadn't heard from him again. Like, I don't remember his social media handle anymore or anything, but I specifically remember this one because we're talking about like a very attractive man who has not had any issues um, with having sexual partners, who, now is affected by this and is wondering how it's going to impact his career because now he can't just hook up with people. Like, the whole story there was just wild, right? But that's how a lot of these things happen. Like, there's such shame that I'm not even able to get them to record a podcast with me, or I'm not even able to get beyond just that initial in-depth conversation and then let it go. With Black women, it's been more of a, oh my God, finally somebody's talking about this. There's a Black man with herpes talking about having herpes. Wow. I've not been met with any judgment or criticism at this point, but I just know that there's definitely room for more of these conversations, especially considering I just saw there's a survey. I don't want to get into the statistics, but it was a very high number. Half was the highest of Black women have genital HSV1 or 2. And the statistics don't reflect what I see in terms of it just doesn't seem to reflect it unless there's that shame of wanting to get tested or wanting to put the information out there, or there's fear of disclosure even, because in a lot of cases people don't disclose for various reasons, and then people also miss their initial outbreaks or miss the symptoms. There's all of this stuff across the board, but universally the expectations that I had were based on what happened to like celebrities who were outed for their own sexual health status. And the one that often comes to mind, of course, is the situation where the allegations were against Usher. And seeing how Black people responded to that gave me sort of a blueprint for what to expect if I came out and talked about having my own experience living with herpes. While I expected that because that's what he got, I mean, granted, we're two completely different people, right? But it wasn't like that at all. It was just, I was met with love. Maybe people like stopped talking to me or stopped following me or talk shit behind my back, but I have no way of knowing that. And who's gonna make fun of someone for trying to keep people who are diagnosed with an STD from dying by suicide? You know, like what kind of an asshole are you to do that, right? So it was important for me to look at the intention and focus on the intention more so than the expectation of what was going to happen. Because once that didn't happen, it was just like, oh, okay, I don't have anything to go off of. I have no roadmap. I just have to go off of those core values that I've set for myself and just hope that they guide me in the right direction, because ain't no role models. Ain't no role models for me in this space. I don't know how to navigate like certain situations, or even the question about race and STDs in itself is tricky for me to navigate answering, because I don't think that I have enough information because I don't have enough interaction, but the lack of interaction and information in itself is enough for me to draw a hypothesis there that it's just something that we don't talk about in the community. And part of that could be because of the lack of representation. Part of it could just be shame. Part of it could just be, you know, being Black in America, on top of what expectations come with that. And now you got an STD too. You know, it's that tends to be sort of what it is. It's just like this fear of being outcast by your community, in the same way that we've seen with other people, or the way that how like members of the LGBT community feel about coming out. Like it's not safe for them to come out, or come out to certain people or in their family, in their household. So once you begin to get that acceptance from wherever you get your acceptance and love from, it makes it easier for you to just kind of be like, hey, this is me, this is who I am. And if you're not okay with it, then you can do whatever it is that you're going to do. But the stigma, the expectations that were held over my head, I don't need that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, you touched upon so many things that I want to like pick up on. I feel like we could have a like 5-hour conversation.